of 2020. Over the next hour, we will learn about TAM's newest member benefit through CultureConnect. I'm today's host, Alex Freeman, TAM's Executive Director. A little bit about TAM, if you're not a member or know about us. We're a nonprofit, and our mission is to strengthen the museum community through collaborations, connections, professional development, and advocacy. To learn more about TAM membership, you can go to our website at texasmuseums.org. A little bit about myself. Between 2012 and 2018, I worked in educational technology research, actually 2019. One of the areas I focused on was digital interpretation and mobile learning. I'm happy to see how technology has evolved over those years, and that some of the tools and processes that we're seeing are seeing mainstream adoption, like the method of online learning that you're undertaking today in this webinar, and the digital interpretation you will learn more about today. In today's program, I'm joined by Samantha Diamond, a pioneer in this space. Samantha is a CEO of CultureConnect, an award-winning technology company bringing innovative digital experiences to museums and cultural heritage organizations. Samantha is a passionate technologist and advocate for museums. She's on the board of the Museum Computer Network Industry Association, is a mentor at New Inc., the incubator of the New Museum of Contemporary Art. Samantha and the team at CultureConnect work with museums of all shapes and sizes across the US and Canada, including a few here in Texas. About this webinar, in this webinar, we will show you soup to nuts how to plan and launch successful digital projects. We'll review the digital project planning packet and illustrate with case studies along the way. We'll also cover CultureConnect's Small Museums program and a special offer for TAM members. A few housekeeping notes for today. In this webinar, if you have a question, you may add it to the chat box. If your question relates to a specific part of Samantha's presentation, I'll interject and pass it along so that we can answer it in real time. For more general inquiries, we'll hold them to the end for a Q&A. While the emphasis today will be on digital interpretation projects, mobile apps, in-gallery, touchscreen interactives, and online exhibits, these concepts and tools will work for any digital project at your museum. With that in mind, let's go ahead and get a poll started. Our first poll here. All right, so we've got a couple questions here related to your experience working with these digital interpretation projects or areas of interest. I'll go ahead and leave that up. The poll is down on the bottom of your screen near the chat. So I'll give you a chance to do that, and I'll keep that open while we give it to Samantha. Samantha, let's go ahead and give a few minutes for that for that poll to break in, but tell us a little bit about yourself and take it away today.
Thank you so much, Alex. I appreciate the warm introduction, and thank you to everyone who's joining this webinar today. So I'm going to share my screen. Let's see. You all can see the cover page to a PowerPoint. Okay, great. So today we're going to be walking through best practices for launching successful mobile and digital projects. And the core piece of material that we're going to walk through using a case study is our digital project planning packet, which we've used in client projects and run workshops at associations. But before we get started with that, as Alex mentioned, I'll just tell you a little bit about CultureConnect and kind of where we're coming from to give some context to how and why we developed this digital project planning kit in the first place. So CultureConnect has a platform that publishes a wide range of digital interpretation products. So that's everything from mobile guides and scavenger hunts to in-gallery interactives like digital labels or large touchscreen interactives. And then we also have some products that publish online for sort of distribution outside of the museum walls, from social media experiences to educator tools and online exhibitions. So we've worked with, as Alex mentioned, museums large and small, museums with big budgets, little budgets, no digital staff, huge digital teams, and everything in between. So the thing is, whether you're running a small project or a large project, big team, big budget, small team, small budget, it doesn't matter. The project management best practices are the same. And sort of the different areas that you have to address, from IT and AV to visitor services training to content strategy, it all applies. So this kit is something, this digital project planning packet that we'll walk through is something that you can use for any digital project. Now, the case study that I'm going to go through today is for an in-gallery interactive, just because I needed to pick one case study to kind of make the worksheets come alive. But in the poll, I asked, I wanted to get a sense of the different types of digital projects that you all were interested in, because these principles do apply. Excuse me, I have a little bit of a cough. These do apply to if you're doing collections management implementations, ticketing, digitizing your collection, website redesign, and I do see from the poll results that we have some good representation across the board. Okay, so great. Let's get started with the case study. So today's, I mentioned that there's we're going to work through this packet, and we're going to do so with a particular project in mind, just to kind of make all of the blanks come alive. So this may look a lot like your museum, it may not, but hopefully some of it relates. So it's a mid-sized art museum, 50 to 150 employees, 10 to 40,000 items in the collection, under 500,000 visitors a year, 5 to 15 exhibitions in a year, and about 1 million people a year come to the website. So this is kind of like a solid mid-sized museum. But like most museums, frankly, there is not a dedicated digital team. So the in-gallery interactive that they're looking to create is for the Arts of the Japan collection, and it will focus on items from a specific period, the Edo period, and it'll be installed inside the gallery. And it's going to feature interpretation of the items themselves, historical, social, and political context, and a timeline. It's going to be organized that way. So this is just kind of high-level concept and a nice little end result visual to keep in mind. Okay, so I'm going to switch now to the actual digital project planning packet. So this digital project planning packet is available in printable format and fill-in-the-blank format on our website, and I'll show you where to get that at the end. The way that this is organized is into chapters based on key tasks or key questions. So for example, section 9 is for IT, AV, connectivity, and hardware questions and considerations. You can feel free to print this out, grab section 9, and give it to your IT person. So it's sort of organized in that way. Similarly, like marketing and distribution, maybe this goes to your marketing manager. Or you can sit down together and fill this out as a group. Okay, so I'm going to actually run through each of these chapters. The first one, pretty easy, pretty basic, the project information. To make something real, giving it a name so that when you're speaking to the many stakeholders across your institution, they know what project you're talking about. And just getting a high-level scope down, really like high-level bullet points, will help you nail into the ground what you do know and what you are sure of versus what's still under consideration. So we know it's going to be one application displayed potentially on 2 devices. It's going to be covering the Arts of Japan, Edo period in the gallery. There's 15 collection items that we know we're going to highlight, and it's going to be an introduction to the Edo period. So I bring this up, just kind of putting these bullet points around project scope, because oftentimes when technology projects start, there's a sense of feeling overwhelmed. There's so many questions. There's so many things to consider. And it's interesting because there's actually several things most likely that you are actually quite sure about. And so a big part of this exercise is to start filling the blanks for a situation where fill in the blanks for what you do know, and it will start to build confidence and consensus whether it's just you working alone at the institution, as I see somebody mentioned, they only have one employee, or you're working across many stakeholders. Also, identifying what is out of scope is very important. So this is about the specific Arts of Japan gallery. This is not going to include discussion of other collection items or other galleries. Even if that seems obvious, stating it will help control the conversation later on. Okay. Moving on to goals and objectives. We're going to be here for a couple of minutes. This is one of the most important things before you get started, before you talk to vendors or talk to internal stakeholders, is just really understanding sort of your goals and objectives. So one, there's many project management tools out there. One is the SMART method. When you're thinking about your goals, are they specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time-bound? So that's something to kind of keep in mind if you feel like conversations with stakeholders are maybe getting too big or too vague, kind of getting folks to focus and provide more detail, and think of if they're achievable and realistic are ways to kind of bring everybody down to earth and to ensure that the project actually happens and doesn't have too much scope creep. Many institutions have strategic plans, and we always make a recommendation that you try to see how this project, a digital project, relates to your strategic plan. Whether your museum strategic plan, it may not even have a section on technology at all. So in this example, the 2019 strategic plan said activate the collection to engage visitors and enhance deep learning and appreciation for the arts. That doesn't mention the word digital or tech anywhere, but this project's goals are intimately tied to that strategic plan goal. And this is a great thing to do in order to build buy-in with other board members and executives within your institution.
Can I interject for a second?
Absolutely.
Because I believe that this strategic goal or initiative is really key in even exploring this type of work. So the individual said they want one employee, no budget, and no group of support. Then is this a core part of their strategic plan? How does this relate to the type of work that they want to do? And I think that's an important question to ask before going into these into using this solution to help advance your strategic plan. Do you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there is, every institution, whether it's one person or 1,000 people, has priorities and strategic objectives. And the folks on your board also kind of have those priorities and those strategic objectives. And if you're looking at what those are and a digital project that you want to do is in no way related to that, I would say digital is maybe not a priority at your institution at that moment in time, or you need to evolve the digital program in order to be better aligned with your strategic goals. And I think what sometimes happens at institutions, including large, well-funded institutions, is there's sort of this alignment doesn't happen necessarily. These projects are sort of like little limbs that grow off to the side. But the ones that are really successful and have good institutional buy-in, board buy-in, I think that you can find a way to relate them and align them to the strategic priorities, even if they're not formally written into a 5-year plan. Certainly, you know, even the smallest organization is going to have those materialized in some way.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, great point, Alex. Thanks. So when you're thinking about goals and objectives, another thing to keep in mind is project evaluation. So you set a goal at the beginning and then all the way at the end, or at some point over time, how are you going to evaluate that you actually hit your goals and objectives? And we're going to talk in the next section about what those specific goals are and how to measure them. So we've identified in this particular museum that the interpretation and education department manager is the one who will be responsible for evaluating the project. And they're going to do it post-launch on a quarterly basis to review engagement over time. And the first report will be 3 months after the application launches. Now, you can do evaluation before launch or post-launch. So this particular institution decided to do it after launch, but we work with a lot of customers who want to build like a prototype and they want to put it in the gallery and sort of soft launch it for a month. And then they want to, or even a couple of days, get insights and do evaluations at that point, and then finish the project and launch it and then go from there. So this is this project, this process of doing things at the beta stage or the prototyping stage is typically a best practice in the software world, and is slowly being adopted, as I've seen over the last couple of years, by museums, who I think tend to work in the sort of like, there's a big launch and then it's over. Software, anything digital or technology driven, is a little bit more iterative and constant. It doesn't have, there are moments where there's a launch and a handoff, but you're always having to sort of maintain and iterate. And it's just a bit of a mindset difference in the technology world versus the more traditional sort of exhibitions world. Okay, so when you're thinking about prioritizing, one method, and there are many methods, is the Moscow method. And so that stands for must have, should have, could have, or won't have. Another way to think about it is priority 1, priority 2, maybe priority 3, and then this will not happen, it will not be in the project. So I mentioned this, we're going to apply this in a couple of different ways, but I mention this because when you have a lot of stakeholders at the table, I mean, a lot of stakeholders could be 3 people, if they have 3 strong voices, who have different priorities. And so one method is to sort of lay out what's on everybody's mind, what everyone believes is important. That acknowledgement is really helpful in sort of like just making everyone feel heard, and then together sorting through what is a must-have. And certainly you would not want to go through this listing and labeling and everything is a must-have. There has to be some discipline around prioritization. And it's a way to accomplish this and get stakeholder buy-in without anybody feeling like their ideas are more or less important than others. And so just working through this example, the first section here is on the problem/pain point that you're trying to solve with this digital experience on the Edo period in Japan. So the first problem is there's no wall labels or interpretation anywhere for these objects. It's just going to be like simple labels. And so the most important thing is that there's interpretation and identifying information. And so that's a must-have. A should-have is there's no method for currently in this museum for measuring engagement. So so long as we accomplish the first thing, it would be really good to kind of look and see how people are engaging in the gallery. And there's a couple of ways to do that. But one thing we will not have, because we had mentioned that it was out of scope, was there will not be a channel for creating connections across collection galleries. While that would be awesome, it was decided that this was very focused on the exhibition space with the Arts of Japan collection. Okay, so the next 2 sections are looking at, so that was pain points. Now let's look at the qualitative goals and the quantitative goals. So qualitative goals can still be measured in different ways, but I usually group them into things like educational outcomes, entertainment value, marketing objectives, research, etc. So this app should introduce the Edo period, must have. This app should bring objects to life for the visitor, must have. Then content should be entertaining and engaging. That's a should have. So long as we accomplish the first 2 things, you know, the next order on the list would be this. But the 2 that say could have, these are things that have been sort of priority 3, you know, maybes. It should help highlight objects not on view. So this isn't really a priority for this application. And then the metrics can help in future fundraising efforts. This would be cool to have if possible, but it's not a priority 1 or priority 2. And then finally, looking at measurable outcomes, quantitative outcomes. And so these are not, these are blanks that you can fill in and type whatever the most important measurable outcomes are. So engagement time, this is ideally, visitors are engaging 1 to 2 minutes with this interactive. Ideally, they are looking at about 5 pages of content on average. And we're looking for 25 to 75 visitors engaging with the application per day, based on where it is in the gallery, in the museum, the number of visitors, and the season that it's going to be up. And so if you're looking at this and you're like, well, I don't know how many visitors a day I expect to look at this, or how many pages of content, or how many minutes I expect them to sort of engage or dwell at the interactive, I would say it's important. There's ways to maybe back into it if you've ever done an interactive before, talking to your peers at very similar institutions that might have done interactives in the past and seeing what their engagement has looked like. Thinking about how many visitors to a gallery, to that particular part of the museum or to your museum in general come per day, and then putting a percentage around that. I think 10 or 20% of people will engage with this. The first time that you come up with these metrics and then you complete this project, think of it as establishing a baseline. So you may end up with people engaging with 10 pages for 4 minutes on average. That's great, you exceeded your goal. And you could kind of look into, well, why was that? You know, maybe it had something to do with where it was positioned and what gallery. So don't be intimidated if you're not sure what those numbers should be if you haven't done digital in the past. I think the most important thing, though, is that you actually do establish some kind of goal. Even if you actually have to sort of like make assumptions and back into it in some way, I think it'll be really helpful for getting everyone on the same page about what success looks like. Okay, so I'm going to move through to the third section. Alex, any questions coming through? Okay. So this next section on target audience. I think one of the big questions to ask when you're thinking about who are the people actually using this interactive, who is your primary audience? One really nice way to think about this is whether someone is a skimmer, swimmer, or diver. So skimmers are folks who are breezing through the gallery, don't have a lot of time. They're looking for like surface level engagement and orientation. Divers on the other end of the spectrum are maybe returning visitors to your museum. They're passionate about the subject matter. They're the people that read every wall label, sit and watch every movie that you have playing from start to finish. Now, swimmers are museum visitors who will typically target an exhibition, a particular collection item, or they will, when something strikes their interest, they will dive. So they're not coming in with this intention that they have to breeze through in 20 minutes. They're also not coming in with the intention that they're going to read everything. But when they're interested, they will dive a little bit deeper. So this interactive is meant for swimmers, and then we elaborate a little bit about why that is. So we're aiming to engage all visitors because museums want to always do that all the time. But by meeting the swimmer's needs with layers of content about the object, we can also satisfy skimmers who may only engage with the top layer of what catches their eye. Divers may engage more pages and views than expected, but we can, if they're really looking for something really deep, if they're already coming in with a ton of knowledge about the Edo period, maybe we direct them to the exhibition microsite or somewhere else. And so understanding this, who your target audience is, will help you craft content and develop interpretation in a way that will help you understand who your priority audience is and address that priority audience. I see someone, a few comments are coming in about visitors are really varied and there's generally skimmers with a few swimmers. This is very normal. Every museum has a variety of visitors. I think the idea is to think about who your priority audience is with this interactive. If your priority audience is a skimmer, then it's important that you're not overloading them with too much content up front. That would maybe not intimidate a diver in any way, but might drive a skimmer away. So it's really just about understanding that intention. It doesn't mean you're not going to address these other audiences. It's just that you're acknowledging where your priority is. Another piece, this is really about intention and engagement. And so what does that materialize into in terms of their dwell time, or how much time they're spending using the kiosk. I'm going to say 30 seconds is minimum, and a maximum would be 5 minutes. And the average time for most visitors would probably be about 1.5 minutes. And so this is one of the most important metrics, because when you're writing content, it takes time to read paragraphs of content. It takes time to watch a video. And so if you have 2 minutes, if the first thing they see is 2 minutes worth of paragraph reading, they're never going to get to the other pages in the application. So it's a little bit of a guide for content development, and the way that you break up the content so that you're actually making sure that someone can get a flavor in 30 seconds and have a good experience at 1.5 minutes, and not require a full 5 minutes in order to really get anything out of it. And again, that's all aligned to who we're targeting and how we're meeting the needs of the skimmers and the divers, even if we're targeting the swimmers. I'm just going to skip a little bit here. These are just things to think about in terms of, like, the second they get to the application, they need to be able to use it pretty quickly. You don't want there to be a complicated game that requires 10 minutes to learn before you can engage. Expected subject matter expertise of the primary audience, none to low. This is very introductory content for this application. It's meant for both individuals and group use. So how are you going to accommodate multiple people? This is a big question in museums that are wanting to work with families or have school groups or have a lot of traffic. And so there's a couple of ways of addressing that. This institution chose to create multiple devices. So it's the same app published on multiple screens so different groups can engage. Another way to accomplish it is to potentially just have a much larger screen than a tablet. And then I love asking the negative question, like, who would not be an ideal target audience for this particular interactive? It is not meant for children, because the school tours are led by staff, and this is really meant for self-guided learning. So this is not geared for younger age group. And this is not prescriptive, by the way. This is just showing one case study with one museum and choices that they made. You might make totally different choices with your project. Okay, I'm going to move on now to funding and budgeting, favorite topic. Okay, so one of the things that happens with technology projects is you start off, you have an idea, but you don't have all the details, but you have to go to a vendor, if you're working with an outside vendor, to get a quote. But it's kind of like a cart and horse conundrum, because the vendor can't give you a really good quote if they don't have all the details. So it's just totally accepted that these projects are defined and refined iteratively alongside the funding and budgeting process. Not to mention the fact that you can get a great quote with all the details, but you then don't have that met in the budget. So how do you know which part of the project to do, et cetera? So most technology vendors in the space, myself included, kind of know how to navigate this process along with you, because we understand the budget cycles and all of that. So I think the thing to focus on in this case is to think about what you do know, which is cost drivers and funding triggers, even if you don't know exactly what the costs are and what funding you've received. So the first question is any of this project funded as of today, the day that you're filling this project worksheet out? In this case, the project is fully funded. If you had written partially, then you would have different answer to this sort of what happens if the funding does not fully materialize, or no, not at all. You just have to kind of think about like the scenario planning a little bit. So in this case, you're not off the hook completely. This is fully funded, but there is no contingency funds if there's a budget overrun, which from what I understand is pretty much the case with all museum projects, because they're operating on fixed budgets, typically a lot of times from grants and things like that. So this particular museum, and again, these are just for illustration purposes, but this museum has a minimum of $20,000 in total for this project. they might be able to go up to 25,000, but they're really only approved for 20. So they really need to make sure that this project comes in at $20,000. So how is the budget divided? These are on the left-hand side, typical categories for cost. Usually in interpretation projects like mobile apps and in-gallery interactives, they might be slightly different or more or less applicable for, like, if you're building a website or doing a digitization project. But I think the important thing here is to be able to outline, you know, at a very high level, is this happening in-house or is this something that's going to cost money and be outsourced? In this case, all the research and the content production is happening in-house. The installation's happening in-house. There's been they're getting off-the-shelf hardware, so it's going to cost $5,000 for 2 devices and kiosk mounts. We're not spending any money on licensing and rights and reproduction. So this is how we're gonna divide our budget. A lot of times with software, pretty much all the time in software, there's going to be annual and recurring costs. And this, we'll talk about maintenance a little bit later. So the annual budget for all the software maintenance, let's say, is $5,000. And there's also contingency money put away over time, $500 a year, in case a device breaks or you need to replace a kiosk. So you're planning ahead around maintenance instead of being forced to be reactive to it at a later date. And you're thinking about that in the budget from day one. Okay, gonna move on to the next section. I just want to make sure we have time to get through all the sections. So key stakeholders. This is really interesting. So at the beginning of all of our projects, we have a kickoff meeting, and we have an actual matrix of the different work streams on the left side, and then all of the different stakeholders along the top. And then we ask who is a contributor, an approver, just needs to be looped in, or is totally uninvolved with this work stream. And it's called a stakeholder matrix, and it's proven to be really helpful for us getting to know the team, the client team, but also it's a good exercise with the client team for everybody to kind of say, I care about this, I don't care about that, I need to contribute here, I have to approve there, in a way that's very like non-confrontational. So in this case, this is a project that's owned by the education and interpretation director, but the day-to-day project manager, the one who's really kind of pushing this forward, is the education coordinator. And the person who is signing off on this project is, again, the director of education and interpretation. This is really helpful in terms of just understanding information flows and who needs to be looped in when. But there are some other core stakeholders: the head of technology, the head of exhibitions, the curator for the Arts of Japan collection, and there is also a very active board member who's funding this project who wants to be kept in the loop throughout. By the way, I just want to make a mention of the board member. Sometimes there are external stakeholders that surprise you towards the launch. And like, if you don't do this exercise up front of like identifying the stakeholders and how and when they should be involved, they might surprise you at the end. Like all of a sudden, the director of exhibitions wasn't a part of this project, and the day before it goes to launch, they're like, wait a second, I want to have a say. Or a board member all of a sudden wanting to like edit everything at the last minute. I haven't really seen that last one happen, but I think this identifying stakeholders and their role up front will really save you headaches later. Okay, so project resources. I have this split into outside vendor and in-house resources. So do you have a vendor identified? Yes. Did you or will you be sending out an RFP? Why or why not? And I think this is a really good question to ask, because I think a lot of institutions, especially private institutions who don't have strict procurement policies, don't necessarily write and send out RFPs, even informal RFPs. And I think they can be a really helpful way of getting what you need from vendors, even if it's like one sheet of paper that literally has sections 1 through 5 and the information you figured out in sections 1 through 5. Giving that to a vendor would help enormously in them being able to give you a quote or guide you in the right direction. But in this museum's case,
real quickly, I'm sorry, could you define what an RFP is?
Oh, sorry, it's a request for proposal or an RFQ, request for quote. It's basically a way to state what the project scope is based on whatever you know at that point and any other requirements that you have, and you give that to a vendor and they can turn around a quote and questions back to you if needed. And then you can use it to make a decision to either, typically it's used to select a vendor, but you can put it out as an RFQ or RFI, so request for information, and just say up front, like, we're in the information gathering stage and this is going to help us create a better project scope. There are institutions, if anyone on the call is part of a government institution or university system, typically they have very strict procurement rules. If anything is over a certain dollar amount, it triggers needing to have a competitive bid process. That may be a formal RFP process handled by procurement, or it may be an informal, you just need to get 3 quotes. Regardless though, this institution doesn't have to do RFPs for projects under $25,000. So that's why they didn't send out the RFP, but at least they know that's why they didn't send the RFP out, or at least got quotes from more than one vendor. So we got a quote, and then this is an important question around key drivers. So we talked about you might not have, you might not know exactly what your budget and exactly what your scope is, but what are the things that are going to drive cost? What's the kind of thing that's going to put you at risk for a cost overrun? And so in this particular institution, they have a lot of restrictions in the physical space. They can't just willy-nilly drill things into the floor because it's a historic galleries and historic setting. So their plan in this budget is to use off-the-shelf tablets and kiosks, which are very affordable and probably will even come in under budget. But if these options are not approved by exhibitions, they'll have to investigate additional options, which might include custom fabrication, which is very expensive because it's someone custom fabricating a kiosk. So this is where that whole getting the stakeholders, the key stakeholders involved early is really important, because the exhibitions director or manager who might be sitting in the kickoff meeting can say right up front, like, you're welcome to use off-the-shelf devices, but nothing can get nailed into the floor, for example. And then you can look for options that make sense for that. I know with a lot of historic homes, this is an issue, so that's why I like this example, but this is a great way to know up front if you do have to go with custom fabrication, if there are no other options and it's going to cost $6,000 for that, then you know you have to come down on the rest of your budget on the software side, or you have to find an additional $6,000 somewhere. And then who approves scope changes? Clearly the deputy director, CFO, because that's at the contract level. So for internal resources, I think the thing that is really helpful here is, did you write any kind of project brief? How have you communicated these requirements to anybody inside your institution? So you might have a project where you have to produce, 30 audio tracks for a mobile guide. That's, script writing and recording and editing, and you might decide that you want to do it internally. You've actually got an in-house resource. Have you communicated with them the timeline for this project? Do they actually have the available hours and access to equipment to do it? And it might be something like audio. It could be something as simple as image prep, gathering the digital assets, etc. And so this is managed internally by the project owner, the director of interpretation. Okay, so moving on to the next section, which is lifespan and maintenance. So when we talk about lifespan, we think about in technology, typically technology projects last 2 to 5 years. Things change rapidly, not just the hardware and the software, but user expectations, user interface design norms, aesthetic norms. think about what tech looked like in the early 2000s or even the mid 2000s versus today. So when you're making an investment and you're thinking about, okay, we're going to spend $20,000 on this project or $120,000 on this project or $2,000 on this project, it doesn't matter. You think about, okay, well, this is going to last us for 2 years, 5 years, 3 years. So with that in mind, you have to think about, okay, how do I make sure this thing lasts that time period? So this particular project is in permanent galleries. It's going to be on display for 3 years. If it's still working at that 3-year point, great. Otherwise, you know, we feel like the project, if it lasts 3 years, is the time we expect it to last. Almost thinking about it in terms of buying a car. Yeah, it's great if the car lasts for 250,000 miles and you have it for 20 years. But usually when you're buying a car, you're thinking about, okay, I'm going to have this for 7 years, 5 years, etc. Okay, and so thinking about what you'll do once the project is over, if you plan to archive it, and how you would go about doing that. And I bring this up at the, you know, this stage in the project because you may have, if you're working with an outside vendor, you may need to ask them, you need to prepare them to ensure that you can actually do this. You can actually create a microsite from the in-gallery interactive. That you can actually export all the content and make sure it gets into the CMS, the collections management system. Okay, so the main things that I want to point out here around maintenance is who will be managing the maintenance. And so the software provider in this case is handling platform compliance and hosting. Exhibitions is managing the physical install of the device. IT is managing electricity, Wi-Fi, bug reports to the vendor, and education interpretation. All they have to worry about is content updates and doing the assessments and evaluations. So at the beginning of the project, it's been made clear who's responsible for what. And if you work at a smaller institution where it's literally one person who has to do all 4 of these things, no worries. I think it's good to kind of lay out who actually is handling, like you're acknowledging to yourself, if you're doing this project solo, that you actually are prepared and have a plan for dealing with these maintenance issues. Okay. Timeline. So at what stage is this project? You know, I use this language. Certainly you can use your own, but are we in the concept stage? Are we writing specs and RFPs? Are we execution, post-launch? Sometimes this project packet is used to like almost in an evaluation of how did this big project go. So you might be using it for that reason. I think having a launch date is very important. In this case, it was tied to the gallery reinstallation opening. In the table below, I identified 5 to 7 major milestones. Now, you can edit what the major milestones are in this particular project. The kickoff, we knew that design needed to be approved by April 15th. Content, which content development typically drives most timelines for interpretation projects. So the writing, the developing of video assets, image assets, audio files, that can take, I've seen projects, you know, you can launch a project in a month, 2 months, but it could also take a year, year and a half if you have to develop content and the exhibition that it's tied to maybe is still, the academic research is still going on, that kind of thing. So always try to be realistic about how much time is needed for content, because at a certain point, an application can't move forward if the content isn't there. You can get a lot done to a certain point, but then there is that moment. And so all the final content will be delivered by July 15th. The app, the full app will be configured and built by August 1st, testing in QA for 2 weeks, and then launch on the 25th. And that'll be in time for the September 2020 opening. Okay, connectivity and hardware. So there's a lot of questions here, but they essentially ask a lot of these details around the how. How are the devices going to work? How is connectivity going to work? Which devices are you doing? Are you getting warranties? So the folks who are handling IT typically will be able to have really good insight here. The connectivity question is something that comes up a lot. We usually ask this early on in the project. So some galleries have no Wi-Fi connectivity. So there has to be a plan for the device running offline and a plan for how you'll sync it back to the internet to sync data from the analytics or sync content if you're refreshing content. Also, power is often an issue when you're dealing with historic properties. There might not be outlets nearby and you can't have cables running across the floor. There's solutions for all of these things, but it's good to, at the beginning of the project, kind of ask these questions and figure it out. And if you don't know the answer, they're great things to ask your vendor partner or another museum, a peer museum, and see how they addressed it. Okay, and then maintenance. These are details that I think are important because what usually happens is there's the launch and everybody's excited, there's the gallery open, everyone's excited, and then it's like there's life after launch is what I say. And so I mentioned this earlier, this idea that you don't want to be reactive. You don't want to all of a sudden there's like weird computer code on the screen, or the screen's black, or it won't turn on, or there's just some weird thing going on. Having a plan for ensuring that that doesn't happen, and then if unfortunately it does happen, that there's like a clear path for getting that resolved, and it isn't like scrambling and then the screen is not working for days or something like that. CultureConnect, the way we work, this does not happen, and we have obviously maintenance is built into all of our projects, and there's a very clear way to resolve things if they ever do come up. So when you're thinking about funding, I mentioned the sort of maintenance piece in the funding section because I think it's important, whether the hardware breaks or there's software needs for any reason, even positive things like wanting to refresh the app's content or something like that. Understanding what those costs are so that they're put into the budget for 3 years instead of it being sort of reactive. And then maybe there isn't the budget there to actually take care of the issue. Okay. Similarly here, content production. Content can sometimes come from many different places, internal resources, external resources. And so we just ask who is providing all of these items. And then, let's see. So a big thing that comes up in the beginning is around design. So does the design need to reflect the museum's brand, the exhibition, or any other type of style guide? And if the answer is yes, sort of making sure that you've got those typicals or that style guide available for reference. We work with a lot of institutions who are about to begin a rebranding and a redoing of their website, their actual like museum organization website. And so I've just noticed, I don't know if there's like a wave of this, but we just seem to have a lot of clients that are getting ready to change their branding and redo their website. So if you're in that situation or you just never had branding done, or you don't have a style guide, or it was done 20 years ago, I think that I would caution against getting into a rebranding exercise in the middle of a interpretive project like this. Because I think that's one of the things that can lead to scope creep. So just keeping that in mind, that even if you do not have a very sophisticated sort of style guide, that you do make a decision up front about kind of the overall look, what the overall look and feel is going to reference. Okay, so we're heading towards the end here. In launch, there's often a number of folks who haven't been involved in the project who all of a sudden are involved in the project. So typically that means folks in the visitor-facing projects. This is everyone from security staff and docents to folks at the registration desk or giving tours. These can be your champions, and these are the folks that are interacting with actual visitors all day long, every day. And so sharing the project with them, helping them understand what it is, they can really be champions of user engagement, because that is who visitors are often speaking to when they're in the galleries. And so just setting the date for when that staff training is going to happen. And then last section is on marketing and distribution. So we have a several page template for like a checklist for marketing and distribution, and these are kind of the highlights from it. And the idea here is bring marketing in at the very beginning of the project, and then bring them in like 2/3, 3/4 of the way into the project. And the idea there is they will tell you what the print deadlines for brochures or posters, when and how they need assets for promoting this on websites, social media, newsletters, when they have to, with the print deadlines for posters on the museum campus, what the registration should look like. And so knowing these dates in advance will help you make sure that they're getting what they need ahead of time, especially if there's real lead time on the print production. And that's it. So I know that was a lot. There are 12 pretty intense sections to this digital project planning packet. It's something that I encourage you. I will show you where to go on the website.
And while you're doing that, Samantha, Susan asked, is that a blank reusable template? Is there a sample one being used here?
Great question. So, so this is our website, cultureconnectme.com, and then up in the top right, we have the Wired Frame, which is our blog that has tons of free resources, including this digital project planning packet. You can find, this is all of the posts, but you can find a lot of the kits and the how-tos in the section called Practicum. And so in here, we have the digital project planning packet. And you can click on this button and it will bring you to a PDF that is editable, just like the one I was screen sharing. It's also printable. It'll print nicely in grayscale or color. Alrighty. So I know that was a lot. I was going to switch gears in the last couple of minutes, Alex, if that's okay, to talk about the Essentials package.
Let's do it.
Okay, awesome. So CultureConnect, we've been in business since 2013, and we've worked with institutions of all sizes. And one of the groups that we wanted to always from the beginning try to serve are small museums. And we define small museums a little bit differently than AAM. And so we finally, in 2019, launched a program after a couple of years of really trying to figure out how to create a package of services and features and a price point that would also make sense to small institutions. And so that's what I just wanted to talk about quickly here. So we have the Essentials package for small museums. Really quickly, the eligibility requirements. It's an your total annual budget for your institution, $2 million a year or under. And like if you're not sure what your total institutional budget is, it's usually in the annual report or your Form 990 IRS filing, that you're a nonprofit and that you're based in the United States. And so it's a much more generous definition of small museums than AAM gives. And the reason for that is if you're $300,000 annual budget, your considerations are very different than if you're a $3, $4, $5 million institution. And from our experience, it seemed like if you're at 1 million or 2 million, you still are dealing with a lot of budget constraints and considerations that institutions that are $300,000 are dealing with as well. So that is why we came up with this criteria. If you do not qualify for the Essentials package, we have some other discounts, especially for TAM members, and then a couple of partner discounts that I'll talk about in just a sec. So the thing to kind of know about the Essentials package is that it's for 2 of our products, our digital label product, so where you tap a hotspot and it brings you to a detail screen like this. And it's also for our mobile guides. So they're 2 very popular products. It's DIY, so we onboard you and train you and get you started and provide you with a lot of tools, but you're really paying for the license and the support. And then it comes with essential features, with the option to upgrade to advanced features. We find that a lot of small museums are not necessarily interested in a lot of the advanced features, so that's why it's optional, and all of the features are discounted. So if you do decide you want to opt, you're still getting a small museums discount. And in my last minute, and there's a lot more detail here on this page about what's included and what's not, but I did want to mention that if you do not qualify for this program, we have 2 additional discount opportunities. If you are a Past Perfect customer, so the collections management system Past Perfect, we offer a $500 credit to those customers, so $500 towards your CultureConnect services. And then some benefits specific to the Texas Association of Museums. So if you're a small museums customer, a small museums package here, and you're getting a mobile guide, the default mobile guide is a web app, so it publishes as like a website on your phone. And there's a small upcharge for publishing that application to the App Store and Google Play. So we waive that upcharge for TAM members. And then the last is if you are a regular customer, so not a small museums customer, and you're a TAM member, you would get a $500 credit towards your CultureConnect services. So Alex, I will send you all these details, links to all of these pages, and the PDF documents if you want to distribute. But that is everything for today. Thank you.
Okay, great. Well, on behalf of TAM, I want to thank Samantha Diamond from CultureConnect for walking us through her free and members-only resources. If you have any questions for Samantha and her team, you may follow up and I'll drop a link in here. CultureConnectMe.com, contact us. If you are interested in TAM membership and our vast museum community, please reach out to admin@texasmuseums.org. And our newest team member, Emmy Larson, will get you set up. I hope to see you at our next online event or face-to-face at TAM's annual meeting in Bryan College Station on April 13th to the 16th, where we'll focus on more tech-related topics. I wanted to note we do have a workshop that we have planned based on our popular fall workshop that we did with TxDOT, the Texas Historical Commission and Bullock Museum, called Smart Use of Technology in Exhibitions of Any Size, led by Kate Betts. That's going to be on Monday, April 13th. And then on Thursday, April 16th, Coven Smith will lead a session on the Museum Technology Charter, where you can take control of your technology selections and get to understand the vast tools that are out there and how you can find the right fit for your organization. With that, bye for now. I'll see you online or at one of our workshops or face-to-face events. Goodbye.
Thank you.